This video isn't about getting the best deal on a bike. It's about finding the bicycle that best suits your riding preferences. I'm Jack from InGuide's Life. In the next 60 minutes, I'm going to lay out an easy-to-remember mental framework for evaluating a bicycle's ride feel. If you're watching simply because you want information on one or both of our test bikes, your time here will be well spent. Finally, thank you, Cannondale. The place you start with buying a new bike is you. You need to figure some things out. You need to figure out your fit measurements. Because if you get a bike that doesn't fit you well, you're gonna overweight the front wheel or you're gonna overweight the rear wheel. You're gonna go diving into that downhill sweeper and you're gonna be like, oh my God, something's not right. Well, what's not right is the bike doesn't fit you. So you need to get your measurements and then you can apply that to the measurements of a given model of bike. But if you start with the bike and find out it doesn't fit you after you spent $7 grand on it, now what are you gonna do? It's gonna cost you a ton of money to get out of that mistake. And all you had to do first was spend, between $200 and $500 on a bike fit to invest in finding out your measurements and save yourself a lot of griefs, a lot of money. For me, having a shorter torso and longer limbs, I need a bike that has a higher stack and a shorter reach. That will allow me to get my seat level, my bar level, and all that stuff working good so the bike handles. Because all the bike manufacturers are putting out their geometry specs, that's a piece of cake. It took me about a half hour, and I realized that Cannondale was the brand for me, the manufacturer for me. So if you're a Trek guy or you're a Cervelo gal or whatever you are, most manufacturers out there these days, in their road race segment, they'll typically have two bikes to choose from. They'll have something like this, the all-around bike, the climbing bike, the lightweight bike, call it what you want, or the aerodynamic bike. In my mind, the most important thing is ride feel. These bikes have a different feel to them when you're on top of them riding them. The question becomes, more racy, a little less racy? I don't know. We got to find out. And there's one way, and that's to test them both. Let's get started. There's only one first day, right? Day one. Within 5 minutes of starting to ride the SystemSix, that was the first bike I jumped on, this happens.
This bike feels fast. Like I'm hauling ass right now.
Now here's the thing. That's a problem. That's an actual problem. Because going into this test, I couldn't be more sure of what was gonna happen. There's just no way I'm gonna prefer an Aero ride over an all-around. Before the test started, I ordered a SuperSix Evo, 4-seat top model, size 54. Some test, huh? Now here's why the SuperSix Evo order is a problem. Papa Wheelies had to buy this bike. When I ordered it, they bought it. Now if I flake out and don't pick it up because I want this bike, well, who's paying that bill? Who's eating that? My friends at Papa Wheelies. You see the dilemma? Hey, Greg, could you put a hold on that SuperSix Evo order, please? And the Cannondale rep, great guy, Sean Hickman. He's taking care of Papa Wheelies and he works it out with them so we can put the order on hold. So danger dodged, but that's what happened. I just had this preconceived notion. Now here's the problem, the preconceived notion. Because if I wasn't if we weren't doing this test, I might have just ridden this bike. And I wouldn't even know how awesome that bike is. I wouldn't even know what a great choice this bike would be for me to buy. I wouldn't know because I had this preconceived notion, Aero bikes don't ride nice. Well, that's wrong. This one rides like a champ.
Just climb on it. Rock's good. don't know, man. Like if I was blindfolded, I don't know if I could tell if I was on an aero bike.
The best thing you can do when you're analyzing these bikes, trying to make a decision, is to go into it without those preconceived notions. When you have a preconceived notion, how objective are you gonna be? You're gonna miss things. You're gonna take a little thing that maybe doesn't matter that much, but it confirms your biases, and you're gonna go with it. And that's what you're gonna hang your hat on, and you're gonna miss a lot. That's what's gonna get in your way. It got in my way. And I mean, like, I know about all this stuff, you know what I mean? And it still happened to me. It still happened to me. That's how easy it is for you to make that mistake.
It's quick, agile, moves quick. A nice easy transition between seated to standing. The front ends must be a lot different because this one feels real kind of like, I don't know, when you're just at a standstill, kind of going slow, it's a little twitchy.
As soon as I came to my senses, like what I was doing, I instantly realized how wrong I was about this bike. So that's what I learned about this bike. Unbelievable sensation, perceived speed, handled great, perfectly compliant. And what I noticed about this bike was I noticed the stability. If I'm bombing down a big descent and there's some broken pavement in the corner, this is the bike I want.
I can't put my finger on it yet. I don't have enough time on them. But I would say in general, like the SystemSix, the aero bike, it's kind of like a slalom ski feeling to me, you know? It's just a little more aggressive handling feel. This bike's real good for cruising, but I gotta feel them out more.
Yeah, day one. Is this the world's fastest bike? Yes, when the world's fastest dude is riding it. It ain't the bike, man, it's the motor. It's you, you're the motor. And that's true. You make the difference. In a bike race, it's the bike rider that makes the difference. But here's the thing, if you're the motor, you should think of the bike as the chassis. And what automotive designers do is they maximize the motor by putting the right chassis underneath it. Equipment matters. Equipment matters in that way. Because nowadays we have so many more options. Back when I started cycling and my cycling coach would say, "Jack, it's the motor," he was right. There wasn't a lot of choice. You could ride a steel bike. And all the steel bikes, all the guys on the team were riding, were pretty much the same bike. They had the same geometry, they had the same materials that were constructing the frame. It gave you similar ride feel. And the differentiation was you, the motor. Now, back in the day, we didn't have aerodynamics. Now you can take advantage of the design of this bike to cut a better hole through the air and get a little more speed for a little bit less effort. In fact, both of these bikes do that for you. This one just does it more. Here's the thing, it's your responsibility when you're purchasing equipment, when you're buying a bike, to get the right chassis. The chassis that's gonna fit your motor. And that's how you're going to use an equipment purchase to maximize you. Bike testing is a complex situation with many variables, many moving parts. I know of two things that make it easier to understand a complex situation. The first one is to have a clearly defined goal going into that situation. The second one is to have a framework of understanding, a mental framework that's going to help us put all these moving parts into context. Now for me, and probably for you, my goal with a bike test is to determine the bike's feel. What's this bike like to ride? Ride feel is the general impression of a bike's reactions to the rider's inputs over various terrain. There's three things there: what the rider's doing, what the bike's doing, and what the ground's doing. But here's the thing, we're gonna focus on the first two. But I'll say this about the third one, the terrain. You wanna try and test the bike over various terrain. You wanna ride it uphill, downhill, ride it on the flats. You wanna ride some smooth pavement, bumpy pavement, and you wanna take it through various corners. Let's get to this framework of understanding for bike testing. It has two parts. There's the rider's inputs, what the rider's doing, and then there's the bike's reaction to it, what the bike's doing. There's four types of actions cyclists perform on a bicycle. The first one is balance. Balance is your body's automatic response to maintain equilibrium. That's the beautiful thing about balance, is it happens automatically. That's also the problem with balance. It remains outside of your awareness, so you don't consider its effects when you're riding a bike. So what you can do is just start becoming aware of that response. Anytime you lean the bike over, anytime you stand up, any change in equilibrium is gonna affect your balance. The second thing you do on a bike, it's called edge control. Edge control on a two-wheeled vehicle is primarily about the outside surface of the tires. Think about you lean the bike over. Well, what are you doing? You're going from the bottom edge, the center edge, to the side edge. And the profile of that tire is going to determine what it feels like to control that edge. The third input factor is rotary motion. Rotary motion is any motion around an axis, and cycling is chock full of rotary motion. You got the spinning cranks, you've got the pedal spindles, you've got the wheels spinning around a hub, you have the bars rotating around the steerer tube. That's all rotary motion. The fourth thing is pressure application. Pressure application is the physical force exerted on an object. Resting your weight on the saddle is pressure application. Pushing on the cranks is pressure application. When you grab the brakes, your fingertips are applying pressure to the brake levers, which makes the calipers grab the rotor. That's pressure application. I can't break down every cycling maneuver in terms of those four types of actions, but I can give you an example that you can use for your own breakdowns. Cornering. Typically, you initiate a corner by leaning the bike over, which is a change in your equilibrium, which is balance. When you lean that bike over, you went from the center edge of the tire to the side edge. Well, that's edge control. If you use some handlebar movement, initiate that turn, that's rotary motion. Not to mention, you're rotating the bike through a radius, the corner. And did you touch the brakes to scrub off a little bit of speed? Well, that's pressure application. But there's another kind of pressure application when you're cornering. Let's say you lean the bike over, you apply some pressure to the inside drop, the handlebar. Well, what happens? It increases your turn in. You go more inside. You did that by pressure application. But what's stopping you from just pushing that bike to the ground? Your balance. Every maneuver is going to be the same thing. Everything you do on a bicycle, just pedaling along, just sitting on the bike, you're using those four things. The acronym for balance, edge control, rotor motion, pressure application is BURP. That's all you got to remember, and you'll be able to start breaking things down. Day 2. I'm starting to get a real bad feeling about the SuperSix Evo. I would do some cornering and I would make a great entry. Apex was fine, obviously shooting through the apex. It was exit that was a problem. Now, what I was getting from this bike on exit was it wasn't staying committed to going inside. It felt like it was feathering out. What was the problem? This bike had all the spacers in it. The bars were as high as they could go. The other thing too, my saddle was way too far back. I didn't have enough weight on the front over the head tube to keep that bike pinned down. That's why I felt like it was floating to the outside for me, because I'm not set up on it right. And so I'm like, well, this thing goes through the corners like by itself. I'm getting that bike. Starting day one, I was like, no, yes. Ending day two, I'm like, no, yes. So the second part of our framework of understanding involves the bike's reactions to what the rider's doing. The bike has three significant reactive factors: the stiffness, the geometry, and the wheels and tires. And in my mind, a better term for stiffness when you're talking about carbon fiber bikes is layup. Hundreds of pieces of carbon fiber are laid into a mold. More material is placed where the designers want the bike stiff, and less material is used where the designers want the bike to be more compliant. In short, the bike's layup determines its stiffness and compliance. And that's why I think layup is the better term. Now, stiffness and compliance are two sides of the same coin. The stiff side is about power transference. When the bike has a stiff bottom bracket and you apply some pressure to those cranks, your force is transferred into forward momentum. On the other side of the coin, if the bottom bracket is compliant, your energy will be absorbed, not transferred. So the bottom bracket has to resist that force that's coming from the side. So you want your fast bike, your race bike, to have a high degree of side-to-side rigidity, lateral stiffness. Now, if the designers made the whole frame as stiff as the bottom bracket, it would make for an overly harsh ride. So you want the frame to have some up and down flexibility, some vertical compliance. The balance between stiffness and compliance is a fine line, because stiffness isn't just about the bottom bracket, it's also about the head tube. When you get out of the saddle to sprint or climb and you're cranking them bars back and forth, you're applying a tremendous amount of force to the head tube area. So you need a high degree of stiffness there. So if the bottom bracket and the head tube both have a high degree of stiffness, where's the compliance? Well, a good bit of the compliance on your bike is in the seat post. It's happening around what the fork's doing, a little bit in the stays and your tires. But on the frame, generally, compliance is designed into the transition areas, the transition between bottom bracket and head tube. And that's where the fine line is. The bottom bracket is where the back end of the bike starts, the back half. The head tube represents the front half. And it's vital that both halves work together. And not just for power transference, but also for just generally maneuvering the bike. Now think about cornering. When you lay that bike over, the majority of your mass is on the saddle, the back half. And all your weight's keeping that lean going, it's keeping the back half of the bike pinned down. Well, if you have a flexible transition here, right, and this downward force gets resisted because you're resisting that cornering force, well, that cornering force comes back up into the front end and bends the bike away from the back end. The front end of the bike is not tracking with the back end, and that destroys the bike's maneuverability. It destroys the handling. You're leaning the bike over and the front end's going the other way. Well, that's just like if you lean the bike up, right? The bike's gonna understeer. It's not gonna wanna shoot through that corner. What about the stiffness in our test bikes? They have very similar stiffness profiles. Yes, these bikes have different tube shapes, and tube shapes affect responsiveness. However, the stiffness profiles of both of these bikes is modeled on the previous generation SuperSix Evo. You're feeling the layup when it comes to stiffness and compliance. You're feeling the geometry when it comes to stability and reaction time. Now here's the thing about geometry. It's so important and so critical to determine the differences in ride feel between these two bikes that we're testing. We're gonna do a whole section on it. Third reactive factor is the bike's wheels and tires. Wheels and tires have an enormous effect on ride feel. If you want a level of consistency with ride feel between two different bikes, and you have a set of wheels you just like to run, well, test both bikes with those wheels. 3 things to look for with wheels and tires. The first one is the profile of the tire, the shape of the outside of the tire. Second thing is the rim and tire junction, where the rim and tire come together. And the third thing is pressure. Those 3 things affect the edge control of your wheel and tire combination, how your bike interacts with earth. So another thing you need to think about with wheels is their stiffness. A flexible wheel is going to negate the benefits of an otherwise stiff frame. You kind of wash each other out and you kind of get a mushy feeling. You don't get that nice, crisp, solid feeling. So that's a quick outline for our framework of understanding for the bike's reactive characteristics. So the acronym for making the bike's reactive factors easy to remember is GLOW. Geometry, layup, wheels and tires. Burp and GLOW give you the vocabulary necessary to make sense of the complex situation of bike testing. It gives you the factors involved. Now here's the thing. Don't wait until you're testing bikes to start playing around with this framework of understanding. Start using it on your next ride. For example, use some pressure application to push down on your outside foot when you're cornering. And then ask yourself, how did that affect the bike's reactions? How did it affect the 3 other inputs? Becoming more aware of what's going on with you and the bike will not only make you a better bike evaluator, it will make you a better bike handler. And that's a good thing. Day 3. For the first time on these bikes, I was like, yeah, dude, this SuperSix Evo, this is a race bike.
Downhill. Fun ring, fun zone. So I got my saddle height where it should be. My reach is a little bit off, but the bars on the SuperSix Evo were just way too high. And initially I didn't really want to mess around with their bikes, but I had to take those spacers out. So now it's a little bit closer to my own position and it's much closer to the system. So it'd be easier for me to compare them because I thought the front end on this bike felt slow. It kind of felt like an endurance ride almost. And I think part of that was just, I was up so high. You know, the bars were up so high. So, see how it feels. Yeah, this bike feels better. So much better already, having the bars lower. Way better. I like this bike. The thing is, I think this chain's a little dry. I didn't oil it. I feel like such a triathlete. Disc brakes, lots of power, modulation. The thing about disc brakes is, I feel like I'm creating friction on something that's meant for it, you know? Like the carbon rims, the braking surface. I mean, it's like the rim. I like to having that rotor. Dancing on the pedals. Woo, this bike feels good. Get this great. Soaks it up. Bikes are designed so well. Watch this real pavement. It's not a real harsh hit. The bike doesn't start rattling. Nice. One up. I don't know if I mentioned it, but this bike is Dur-Ace mechanical. I miss that DI too. Just a couple words on this bike cornering. Stability, confidence, balance. Like if I go too deep on entry, I just feather it out, and then I go to catch it and it holds right there. It doesn't snap back on me. I don't know, man. This is like I'm kind of getting won over to this front end. Someone coming down, right her up. What's up, brother? Nice stable entry. Yeah. I don't have to fight it to lean it over. Leans over nice, stays there. Once I get on the radius, it's rotating me through that corner. I just want it to stay there. Now, yesterday when I had the bars higher, I don't know what it was, but I felt like the bike was fading to the outside on exit. But it feels good today. Probably because I was putting the power down.
So what I realized on day 3 is that these bikes, they have the same jump up to speed, right? I was going 15, I'm going 30. But it felt different, right? It felt like 50 on this bike. It's the geometry. Having that wheel more underneath you makes it want to go forward, makes it want to turn. It doesn't center, it doesn't like self-center. So the difference being in the feel of acceleration is this. The bike feels faster, but it's kind of like a perception. It's like what's going on physically, dynamically with all of it, not just the straight speed, straight line speed. Does that make sense? But on this bike, front tire out there more, it wants to stay like in a center position.
So you know where you're in really high gear, your pedaling gets a little choppier. It's nice to have a bike that doesn't have a twitchy front end, because you're not constantly trying to keep the front wheel straight. So if you got long climbs, this might be the bike.
Both fast bikes. This one seems faster when you're doing it.
Do another rep. Nice easy entry. Just stays right there. It wasn't pulling to the inside, but I could feel it wanted to go there. Like it could have gone there. You lean this bike over and it just boom, darts in there. It's fun, a lot of fun. Through the apex, you can really feel the tire gripping. Like on the SuperSix, you know, it carves a nice line through there. But with this, you really feel the front tire like grabbing the tarmac. The question is, do you always want that for your daily rider? I don't know. But it's fun. Whoa, we were ripping it. You know why? Because this bike rips it.
The geometry of an object is defined as the shape and relative arrangement of the object's parts. For bicycles, that means the lengths of the tubes and the angles that join them. A bicycle's geometry determines its stability and maneuverability. A small difference in geometry can have a large impact on the way a bike responds to rider input. This can make determining the cause of handling differences confusing. A continuum of bicycle geometry, where the extremes of stability and maneuverability are visually represented, makes evaluating the handling differences between two geometries easier to comprehend. Changes in the rider's position also affect the bike's handling, so visually mapping the handling effects associated with the rider's changing center of gravity will also add to our understanding of geometry. Stability and maneuverability describe the bike's steering response. There are two basic methods for steering a bicycle. First, at slower speeds, the rider uses their hands to rotate the handlebars. The geometry of the bike's head tube and fork are the primary factors affecting hand steering. Second, when the bike has enough momentum, the rider can steer using their hips on the saddle to lean the bike to one side. The length of the bike's wheelbase is the primary factor affecting high-speed steering. Let's keep these two steering methods in mind as we draw up our continuum of stability and maneuverability. In our continuum, characteristics that make the bike more stable move to the left. Geometry characteristics that make the bike more maneuverable move in the opposite direction. Let's consider the hand steering factors. Head tube angle defines the degree that the head tube is positioned to the ground. A steeper angle makes turning the front wheel easier, increasing maneuverability. A bike with a shallower head tube requires more steering input, which increases stability. Fork rake, also referred to as offset, is the distance between the center line of the steerer tube and the front dropout. A large rake value is more maneuverable. Less rake is more stable. Trail is the distance between the head tube angle and fork rake. The trail value determines the point where the tire contacts the ground. For road bikes, the contact patch is behind or trailing the steering axis. Moving the contact patch behind the steering axis helps the front wheel self-center. This is called the caster effect. More trail increases the caster effect, which creates more stability. Now we'll consider the hip steering factors. Wheelbase is the difference between the wheel dropouts. Bringing the wheels closer together, shortening the wheelbase, creates a smaller turning radius, which increases maneuverability. A longer turning radius, created by a longer wheelbase, increases stability. A longer wheelbase also adds comfort. Let's compare the geometries of our test bikes using our continuum. The wheelbase of the SuperSix Evo is on the long end for a road race bike. This length gives the bike lots of stability, but the longer turning radius means it is less reactive to hip lean, but only slightly. The new generation SuperSix Evo has a taller head tube, increasing its stack. This raises the center of gravity. A higher center magnifies lean response. At 71 degrees, the head tube angle of the SuperSix Evo is relatively shallow for a road race bike. The slack head tube moves the front wheel forward, increasing wheelbase, adding stability. This angle also improves compliance at the front end. The 71-degree head tube angle, combined with a typical race bike fork rake value, provides a good amount of caster effect. No one geometry factor is working in a vacuum. It's a balance. For example, the increased maneuverability of a higher stack is balanced out with the increased stability of a longer wheelbase. Favoring stability makes sense for a bike designed to be ridden for long hours up and down steep terrain. Put simply, less physical and mental energy is required to keep a stable bike pointed in a straight line. The general ride feel of the SystemSix is considerably further towards the maneuverability end of our continuum. A large part of the move towards maneuverability is the fact that the wheelbase of the SystemSix is more than 3 centimeters shorter, making the SystemSix more reactive, seated or standing. The shorter wheelbase of the SystemSix shortens the bike's turning radius, increasing maneuverability. The front ends of the bikes account for most of the differences in wheelbase, as well as the geometry of factors that affect hand steering. the head tube and fork. The SystemSix head tube angle is 2 degrees steeper. Steeper head angles make the front wheel more reactive to input. It also draws the front wheel closer to the bottom bracket, which shortens the wheelbase. This short wheelbase and steeper head tube angle both contribute to less stable hand steering on the SystemSix at slow speeds. Cyclists typically refer to this as twitchiness. Normally, a bike with a steeper head tube angle would have less trail. In general, less trail would make the bike feel less stable. However, because the fork has less rake, the bikes essentially have the same trail. The final large difference worth noting is the length of the head tube. The SystemSix head tube is 2.5 centimeters shorter. That lowers the rider's hands, moving the center of gravity down, which adds stability, especially in the drops. This bike handles best when riding in the drops. Both of these race bikes handle as they were intended. They were simply designed to have a different balance between stability and maneuverability. So on day 4, we took the bikes to the In Guides Life International World Headquarters test track. It's got this really cool corner. So you come down this hill, you're kind of sweeping on this, a little bit of radius on this hill, and you come into a right-hander, and you got this long sweeping left-hander and a quick right-hander. If you're taking notes, this test here, what you're seeing is probably about 60% of what the bike's capable of. I wanted to go into the corner without brakes and just let the bikes kind of do what they were gonna do. The thing about our test corner here is it's got like a long radius. There's not like a real identifiable apex that you're gonna just shoot through. What you're doing is you're trying to find the sweet spot. You're trying to find the distance from the inside curb to the outside curb that's the fastest line for the bike to rotate through on this radius. Now, the beautiful thing is the bike finds it. And it's a feeling of you're keeping your velocity while you're making that radius. When that's happening, you know that you're not scrubbing off speed. You're letting the bike roll through as fast as it can. So what you're seeing here in the entry to this radius is the effects of that initial right-hand turn. Because if you're leaned over right, now you're gonna make a left-hander, you gotta get the bike leaned over to the left. Well, the SystemSix does that quicker. It has a quicker transition from right lean to left lean. So when I'm further inside on the SystemSix, like I'm reading that, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm inside of that sweet spot. And if I continued on this line, I'm gonna continue moving inside and put this front wheel on the curb. So I let the bike go a little bit and I let it drift out to find that line, that sweet spot line that's gonna allow me to get the quickest rotation through this corner and then be set up for that right-hander. Well, on the SuperSix, it's the same thing. We're too far outside. We're outside of the sweet spot line. The reason that the SuperSix is on the outside is that transition took longer. So I'm letting the bike come inside to find that sweet spot. The inside entry of the SystemSix gets feathered to the outside. The late entry of the SuperSix gets pushed to the inside and the two bikes meet. But I want to point something out to you. They're at the same lean angle. If you lean these bikes over the same way, the SystemSix is going to go more inside. At the same lean, you get more inward rotation on the SystemSix because of the shorter wheelbase and the steeper front end. But they're going the same speed. That's a good thing. The bikes are cornering the same speed, but one's a little bit more inside, one's a little bit more outside. Naturally, they just kind of naturally do that. And that's the difference. That's what these geometries are doing. What's the real difference with aerodynamics in these two bikes? A good way to look at that is what was the goal in mind? What was the goal in mind? So the goal with the design of the SystemSix was to have the world's fastest bike. Well, because aerodynamics plays such a large role in making that bike fast, they just went all in on the aerodynamics. And what that means is the greatest aerodynamic benefit is going to be from a camtail aerodynamic tube. That means a structure, a surface that is longer and comes to a point. When you do that, you add surface area. And when you add surface area, you add material, which adds weight. So when you're gonna try and design a bike that's just absolutely the most aerodynamic it can be, and you need those longer surfaces, you're gonna end up with a bike that has a little bit more weight. The SystemSix is about a pound heavier than the SuperSix Evo. That's the goal for that bike. So you go all out with those longer surfaces. Well, when the goal of the SuperSix Evo is to have a lightweight bike that's great for climbing, you don't want to add that extra pound. What you're going to do is compromise with the absolute best you could get with aerodynamic performance and lean more towards the lightweight end of it. So what they're doing with this bike is they're taking the shape, if it was an extended tube, had the larger surface areas, right, an airfoil shape, and then they're chopping off the back end. So it's truncated airfoil. According to Cannondale, that's going to give you a 30% reduction in drag over a round tube. So even though these aren't, typical aerodynamic shape, that camtail shape, it's a truncated airfoil, you're still getting benefit there. You're getting 30% less drag. A lot of the aerodynamic benefit that you're achieving, certainly in terms of what's easier to test, is the wind before it hits the rider. Because once it hits this massive dude, it hits those scissoring legs and like whatever your water bottles are doing and all that stuff, it just gets more complicated. So kind of the cleanest benefit you're getting aerodynamically is happening before the wind touches the rider, and that's the front of the bike. And the thing is, these bikes are similar construction in the front end. In my mind, I don't have a wind tunnel to test this, but you're gonna get similar aerodynamic benefit from both of these bikes in a practical manner. Yes, of course, like this bike has so many design features that are aerodynamic. In terms of what you're gonna perceive and kind of like the practical benefit of it, for me, it's not a reason to choose this bike over this one. The ride feel is a lot more important. So you're like, Jack, you're doing a Aero versus all-around test and you're telling me aerodynamics don't matter? No, that's not what I'm telling you. Of course they matter. It matters. It matters. What I'm saying is, it's very difficult for me to perceive going half a mile an hour faster using 10 less watts. I don't notice that. I don't perceive that. But it matters. It matters. And if I was a time trial guy and all the guys I'm racing against have all the latest time trial equipment that's giving them an advantage over me, it would matter a lot to me. I mean, I would be investing in the most aero thing I could, because I'm looking for an advantage. Aerodynamics matter. In fact, aerodynamics matter more than just about anything when you're pacing along on flat. The wind resistance is the biggest thing you have to overcome. It's not gravity and it's not friction. It's the wind. It's the air. So if you have an aero bike that's better at punching a hole in it, you're gonna have a benefit.
For myself, when we're I'm buying something, I like to go to YouTube and see someone making a user video of it, because I really get a chance to see what it looks like, how it works, and what people think about it. So what we've noticed is, yeah, bikes look good in the showroom, they look good on the website, but where they look their best is when there's a rider on them whipping them hard. So we try and get some good shots for you to have something to consider when you're buying a new bike.
So day 5 it's a shoot day. It's less about bike testing and more about bike images. But here's the thing, still testing the bikes. What's happening at this point, further riding is not exposing a lot of new things, but it's reinforcing what has already been exposed. Now I'm really to the point where, in terms of making a decision on these bikes, I would take either one of them and love them for specific reasons.
So the SystemSix does all the racy stuff real good. The SuperSix Evo does all the racy stuff, but maybe the next octane level down. But with the SuperSix Evo, I don't have to babysit it all the time. It's not always like crazy racy. It's racy if I push it. This bike is kind of just racy. So that's kind of the difference.
The thing that's really starting to creep in my mind is this. I want this bike bad. This bike's so much fun. So much fun. So anyway, I want this bike because it's racy and I'm like a racy dude. Here's the problem.
The thing that's kind of plagued me throughout my cycling has been overtraining. I just love to ride my bike fast. So riding fast is kind of like my worst tendency. And I'm afraid a bike like this, an all-out speed machine bike, wouldn't be the best thing for my training. So even though this bike is the one that I really have kind of the most fun on, just because it's so aggressive and stiff, short wheelbase, steep front end. If I was still racing, without a doubt, it wouldn't even be a question. I would want this bike first. But I think for me now, I want this bike as like a second bike. My everyday bike has got to not tempt me to the anaerobic side.
Fast bike like this, I'm riding it fast. A couple months of that, next thing you know, you like worn yourself down to a nub. It's called overtraining. This bike's too awesome. Like I'm having this conversation with myself. No, I'm having it with you. But I'm having this conversation with like, that bike's too good. Like I would have too much fun on that bike and I couldn't control myself, so do the right thing and get that SuperSix.
All right, so I was looking up high mod. High mod is a stiffer material, so you can use less of it in a layup. The carbon frames have a material that needs more layup for the same stiffness, so it's heavier by a little bit. But what makes high mod lighter is that you're using less material. You know when you're standing up and you're climbing and there's like a pothole in the road, you want to just zip around it? This thing's good at that. I like climbing on this. I don't see how this would be like a problem climbing, except it's a pound heavier. 1 pound.
We cyclists, we're kind of obsessed with weight. We want the lightweight bike, it goes uphill better, it's lighter, all that stuff, right? And there's good reason for that. Because the game of cycling, the cycling game, is a power to weight game. As the level of competition increases, the margin of victory decreases. What it takes to win at the highest level is very small. So it makes sense to optimize your aerodynamics. It makes sense to be the ideal power to weight ratio. All those things make sense when the margin of victory is very slight. But in terms of you riding the bikes, I don't think you're gonna find a big difference in 1 pound. I mean, this water bottle weighs 1 pound. And even on the theoretical side, like something like the white paper, in terms of climbing, on a 10% grade, the system requires 3 more watts. Dude, I sneeze 3 watts. What they talk about is a system weight. So that's the weight of the bicycle and the rider. Well, I weigh 160 pounds. And these bikes, this one's like 16.5 pounds, this one's like 17.5 pounds. That's under 10% of the system weight. I'm most of the system weight. Now, if I have this on my bike and then I drink it, I guess I'm 1 pound heavier. But what if I'm riding around with this? This is 5 pounds, this is 5 pounds. What if I'm 10 pounds heavier? The biggest difference in terms of weight that you can make for your cycling in terms of your power to weight ratio isn't 1 pound off your bike. It's how many ever pounds need to come off of you to reach your ideal cycling weight. That's the difference. That's where I would put my concern, or I would put my energy into me losing that 10 pounds so I can go from 160 to 150, increase my power to weight ratio, and I won't be too worried about a pound either way on either of these bikes. So day 6, I gotta make a decision. Because this is the problem, right? This is the problem. I've got this bike on order. Do I change it to get this bike? That's the problem. So I'm riding around. I got a camera on the handlebars that I can talk to, kind of almost like to take notes.
So I was thinking who I would recommend this bike for. And one of the people I'd recommend it for might be a little bit surprising. But I'd recommend it for people like me. Let's call it 40 plus. What tends to happen with cyclists as they get older is they lose some acceleration. And if you remember, acceleration is a function of mass. So the other thing that happens when we get a little bit older is we tend to accumulate more mass. So you're losing a little bit of snap and you're getting a little more mass, so your acceleration goes down. So if you're, let's say 40 plus, this might be a great bike if you want to get some of that acceleration back. You want to level the playing field with your riding buddies. A bike like this that accelerates like a bat out of hell might be the way to go. Day 7.
If I was smart and I cared about what people thought of me, we wouldn't be talking about day 7. Day 7 never happened. Here's the problem. Oh, it happened. Oh, it happened. Check it out.
On this day, we answer the last remaining question I have. What's it like to descend on this bike down a mountain? Mount Wachusett. That we're currently assaulting at a very slow pace. I wish I had less mass. Somebody just had to know what it was like to barrel down a mountain on a SystemSix. Okay, that was Mile Road. So the good thing about doing this, where you're just riding the bike up to test it out. Oh, wow. Guess what? In the wintertime, mountains have snow on them.
Genius, right?
So I don't know if you can see that sign behind me that says do not enter. About 200 meters up here, just right around the corner, that's where the ski slopes start. And there's like 10 feet of snow on top of the road. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna salvage this trip. We're still gonna go down some really big hills and see what this thing's like going downhill. Golly, that was scary, dude. Really bad pavement. Picking up a lot of velocity right now. I'm on the brakes. It doesn't matter what bike you're on, this hill is scary. Because it's like a wide open burner. back on the gas. We're at the rollout. And I'm relieved. I'm literally relieved.
We salvaged it. We found Scary Hill and took the SystemSix down it, and it wasn't the bike. It's just the hill, Scary Hill. So the bike's fine. Bike descends great. I had nothing to worry about. It was really warm out. It was like 65 degrees out. We're like, hey man, let's get some shots of the JRU, the Joy Rider uniform. Other people call it a kit. No, it's the JRU. So that's where I am day 7. Step 4. Time to make a decision. Which bike are we going to buy? Ultimately, your decision, which bike to get, comes down to your preferences. Something that I can't give you. There's all kinds of factors that go into buying a bike. What you're gonna like, what's gonna turn you on, what's gonna make you go out there and ride that thing. But I think if you use the tools we've given you, the framework of understanding, where you determine what you're doing and how it affects the bike, how the bike reacts to your input, and the geometry continuum, where a particular bike falls on that line, is going to help you determine what's going on with the bike. You're going to be able to categorize a bike as more maneuverable or more stable. Now, what's your preference? Do you prefer more maneuverability or do you prefer more stability? And for me, the bike that suits my preferences for ride feel is the SuperSix Evo. You and I, we were meant to be. I chose the all-arounder. I feel it in my soul. And it doesn't have to do with aerodynamics. It doesn't have to do with weight. It has to do with the ride feel. It's not because there was something about the SystemSix I didn't like. I liked everything about that bike. My idea was to have one road race bike. One bike that does it all for me. The thing is, where the SystemSix lands on the continuum of stability and maneuverability, it's too far on that continuum towards maneuverability for my preferences. If I was in the position to have the SystemSix as well, in a heartbeat, brother, I would love that bike. I would take that bike out on all the group rides. These kind of punchy 2.5 hour, 3 hours rides where it's slice and dice, SystemSix would be an ideal choice. But if I'm gonna go for an epic 5-6 hour ride all day, I think it would become tiresome at some point. Keeping that front wheel straight and pointed down the road, after a while it's draining, physically and mentally. This bike just self-centers better. It stays straight going down the road easier than the SystemSix. Another thing that I really appreciate is there's like no cables on this bike. There's 2 hydraulic hoses for the disc brakes. Nothing's rattling around. It's so solid. I hit some bad pavement and it's like it didn't happen. I love that about this bike. I love how clean it looks. It's just a great bike. The idea with this video was that when we got the decision phase and I showed you the bike that I chose, I was gonna kind of do a little bit of a review, kind of some of the things I did to the bike. Turns out we don't have a lot of time left. It took a while to do the explanations that you need to make a decision on what bike's for you. So, we're gonna do a separate video and we're already working on it. We're gonna do a video talk about some of the changes that I made with this bike. So that's it. That's how you buy a bike. We hope this helps you make a better decision. And if you think this is content that other people would appreciate as well, please like, comment, and share. Helps us spread the word. And you probably want to subscribe because we've got more great content coming for you real soon. Thanks for watching.